A few weeks ago, I was standing on a refurbished pier along the Yangtze, watching a group of elderly locals huddled around a pair of high-powered binoculars.
Oh, wow.
They weren't looking at the massive cargo ships or the sprawling bridges. They were scanning the surface for a glimpse of a river pig, the Yangtze finless porpoise.
The famous river pig, right?
Exactly. And one woman, she was just beaming, showing me this blurry photo on her phone like it was a winning lottery ticket. "They're back," she said, her eyes just lit up with this quiet, almost reverent pride.
That's amazing.
She said, "The water is class 2 now. You can feel the river breathing again." And she spoke about the 10-year fishing ban, the shuttered factories, with this real sense of deep down satisfaction, like a long overdue debt had finally been paid.
A moral victory, almost.
That's exactly how she saw it. To her, the return of the porpoise was a sign of a civilized nation returning to its roots. But then, as we're standing there, this fleet of electric-powered barges glides past, totally silent and clinical. They were heading toward a new high-tech corridor, where a sprawling chemical plant had stood just a few years before. And I asked her, what about the hundreds of thousands of fishermen who had to be reallocated? Or the thousands of businesses dismantled by decree to make this happen?
And what did she say?
She just shrugged. To her, and a lot of the people there, these weren't points of debate or subjects for a lawsuit. They were simply the physical evidence of a state that finally knew how to exercise its will.
That shrug says everything.
It really stayed with me. It revealed this logic that feels, increasingly alien to the West. The idea that ecology isn't some sentimental luxury, but a calibrated engineering deliverable.
Right. It's not about feeling good. It's about hitting a spec.
Precisely. What looked like a peaceful nature scene was actually the manifestation of a technocratic execution. So precise, it makes the procedural debates of the Mississippi or the Rhine look like relics of a stagnant past. It made me realize that the porpoises aren't just back because China got green. They're back because the state has mastered the art of reshaping a 6,000-kilometer watershed into a single managed machine.
And that physical fact raises a really chilling question. If a nation can rebuild a river's entire soul by decree, what does that mean for the next stage of global industrial supremacy?
That observation you just made, connecting the porpoise to technocratic execution, is so powerful. You've really highlighted a crucial insight here. This ecological success, this rebuilding of a river's soul, it isn't just about environmental sentiment.
Not at all. It is the physical evidence of highly advanced state capacity and a really unique model of governance. The strategic transformation of the Yangtze River economic belt from this traditional manufacturing corridor into a global benchmark for green industrial development. That required mandatory technological upgrading across an entire watershed.
That's state-led ecological pragmatism in action.
It's a shocking realization when you think about it, right? We're talking about systemic, centralized resource management that successfully overcame these really deep-seated local economic interests and inertia across an area the size of Western Europe.
Which implies a highly scalable model for coordinating vast administrative resources and, crucially, ensuring accountability.
And that coordination is exactly what we need to impact today. I think our mission for this deep dive is to look beneath the surface of the clean water and the silent barges. We need to explore the specific bureaucratic and political mechanisms that enabled this level of large-scale industrial and ecological restructuring.
Right. How do central mandates, like achieving Class 2 water quality, or shifting an entire nation's energy structure, how do they actually translate into unified and measurable regional results across such a diverse territory?
Because that success, at the end of the day, is the integration of high-resolution digital monitoring and systemic resource management. It is, like you said, modern state capacity made manifest.
So let's unpack this with the mechanism you can literally trace on a map, the River Chief System, or RCS. This system seems like the primary point of accountability that really drove this massive ecological shift in the Yangtze.
It is absolutely the foundation of responsibility. The RCS is the specialized governance regime they implemented specifically to solve these perennial water pollution issues that had plagued the country for decades, especially after the rapid industrialization of the late 20th century.
It's important to remember this wasn't initially a central decree, was it? It came from a local solution to a crisis.
That's a crucial point. It arose from a crisis. It didn't start in Beijing.
So tell us about that origin. Where did the idea come from?
It came from a city called Wuxi back in 2007. That year, the Taihu Lake experienced this just devastating cyanobacteria bloom. It was a massive green algae slick that rendered drinking water unusable for millions of people.
A complete catastrophe.
A total public health crisis. And the local response was to assign high-ranking officials direct, personal, inescapable responsibility for the water quality in their jurisdiction.
So not an agency, but a person. A powerful person.
A powerful person. The party secretary, the mayor, their names were put on signs by the river. And this local practice, it proved so effective in not just managing the crisis, but in the sustained cleanup afterwards, that by 2016, the system was expanded nationwide. It reflects this massive national commitment to institutionalize environmental governance.
Okay, so it's a localized solution that proved so effective it became national policy. But what makes it so ruthlessly effective bureaucratically? Is it just about assigning names to rivers, or is there a deeper political lever being pulled here?
The power lies entirely in its hierarchical structure and how it fundamentally alters bureaucratic incentives. The river chief system integrates environmental responsibility directly into the evaluative and promotional processes of local officials.
So it hits them where it counts, their careers.
Exactly. When we talk about clear mandates, this is the system that provides them. River leaders at all levels, from the provincial party secretary all the way down to the village-level chief, are given specific, measurable tasks related to water quality, pollution control, and ecological restoration.
That immediately changes the calculus for a local official, doesn't it? They can no longer just prioritize GDP growth like they might have in the 1990s.
They can't.
They now have an explicit career-defining political imperative to balance that growth with green targets, because their performance appraisal, their chance at promotion, depends heavily on the cleanliness of their specific stretch of river.
Absolutely. It's a mechanism of accountability that transcends the traditional bureaucratic silos. Historically, environmental protection agencies often had low hierarchical status. They lacked the power to challenge industrial development that was being pushed by local party leaders.
They were seen as a hindrance to progress.
Precisely. The RCS elevates the environment to a central political concern. It places responsibility directly on the most powerful person in the region. And we can see the success metrics clearly. The Yangtze River's mainstream, which is the 6,000-kilometer artery, has consistently met the Class 2 water quality standard for 3 consecutive years now.
3 years.
That is sustained physical proof that this hierarchical system is overcoming decades of historical fragmentation and, that problem of localized regulatory oversight.
Achieving that kind of consistency across such a vast and diverse watershed, it seems like an organizational nightmare. How do they maintain a unified vision while still addressing the thousands of unique industrial and geographical challenges along its course? I mean, you can't use a single template for the upper reaches in Tibet and the lower delta near Shanghai.
You can't. And that's where the localization and adaptive policy implementation come in, specifically through an approach they call one river, one policy.
One river, one policy.
Right. The RCS mandates the overall goal, clean the river, but the one river, one policy plan provides the mechanism for execution. It requires local governments to develop these tailored policy toolkits for their specific section of the river. This approach ensures comprehensive planning and coordination for major river basins, but allows for localized execution and technical specificity.
Can you give us a concrete example of how that tailoring works?
Sure. Think about the difference between a major industrial city and a rural tributary. In a highly urbanized area, the core problem might be what they call black and odorous water bodies.
Which is caused by what exactly?
It's primarily caused by untreated sewage and a lot of small-scale unregulated pollution sources. So the policy toolkit there requires targeted remediation, upgrading urban drainage infrastructure, and really specific localized enforcement. We've seen this in places like the Fuxuanxi and Dapagu rivers, where they went in with very surgical solutions.
Whereas upstream, the issues might be completely different. Deforestation, maybe, or agricultural runoff.
Precisely. Upstream, the policy toolkit would focus on broader ecological restoration requirements, reforestation, managed agricultural practices to reduce fertilizer runoff, and strict enforcement of the fishing bans to let the ecosystem recover. The solution applied? The remediation methods, the technologies, the timelines will differ vastly from a downstream industrial zone.
So it's this tailored, micro-level approach, coordinated within the macro framework of the RCS mandate, all tied back to the central official's career file.
That's the chain of command. And it moves far beyond simple pollution limits. It involves deep resource management and infrastructure redesign. It demands massive capital expenditure from enterprises.
And that's the big question, right? Does this clash with the historical emphasis on economic growth?
Yeah.
How do you force a factory to spend millions on an upgrade when its main goal is to produce cheaply?
Well, the system is designed to transform that clash into alignment. It's meant to foster what they call a virtuous cycle.
A virtuous cycle of green growth.
Exactly. The long-term goal of the RCS is not to stop economic growth, but to promote green-oriented development by forcing enterprises to innovate technologically and optimize their industrial structure.
How does that work in practice?
When you're a business and you're facing these strict, non-negotiable environmental mandates that are tied to the career of the most powerful person in your province,
You take them seriously.
you take them very seriously. The local governments stop protecting outdated polluters. Businesses are then compelled to invest heavily in cleaner technology, in process optimization, in industrial ecology, just to remain viable.
So it's a kind of forced modernization.
It's a calculated strategic economic transformation managed via ecological mandate. It enhances regional technological innovation, and in the long run, it offsets the perceived costs of environmental regulation by upgrading the entire economy.
The success of the River Chief system and its uniform execution, it really forces us to zoom out and look at the underlying political architecture that makes this level of coordinated continent-spanning management even possible.
We have to. The political system is formally unitary, which means local governments derive all their authority from the center. But it's administratively colossal. It spans 4 subnational levels. You have provincial, municipal, county, and then township.
And the inherent challenge, which you're saying is also the system's design strength, is managing that scale without the implementation just collapsing into localized self-interest.
Exactly.
So how does this unitary structure prevent the system from fracturing? It seems like it would inherently create tension between Beijing's mandates and the local desire for provincial autonomy and, revenue.
The core mechanism for managing this tension is something called the Tiao Kui Administration. This structure is absolutely essential for understanding how central provincial coordination actually functions on a daily basis. And it explains the dual accountability that makes the RCS so powerful.
Okay, Tiao Kui. Vertical lines and territorial blocks. Walk us through how that actually works on the ground.
Okay, so Kui refers to the territorial authority. That's essentially the local government, the provincial or municipal government, headed by the party secretary. These leaders are responsible for everything within their geographic boundaries.
The horizontal block.
The horizontal block. Then you have Tiao, which refers to the vertical authority. These are the functional departments that report up the chain to the pertinent central ministry in Beijing.
Okay, so a functional department in a provincial government, let's take the Provincial Environmental Agency, is subordinate to both the provincial governor, the Kui, and the Central Ministry of Ecology and Environment, the Tiao.
Precisely. It's a dual reporting structure. It's designed to create tension.
So it's tension by design.
It is. This design creates immense functional fragmentation because you have these powerful central ministries, the Tiao pulling on local entities that are also being pulled by their territorial authority, the Kui. This tension is built into the system to ensure compliance. If the Provincial Environmental Agency fails to clean up the river, they are failing their territorial boss, the Kui, but they are also failing their functional vertical line, the Tiao, which may report their failure straight to Beijing.
Let's apply this to the electric power sector, which is incredibly complex. If regulatory oversight is structurally fragmented like that, how does anyone get a massive unified grid built and regulated?
It makes coordination a continuous, high-level challenge. Authority over the electric power sector, for example, is dispersed among multiple central agencies. You have the National Development and Reform Commission, the NDRC, which is the macroeconomic planning body. They approve major projects and set long-term targets.
Okay.
Then you have the National Energy Administration, the NEA, which handles more specific energy planning and regulation. And finally, you have the State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission, or SASAC, which actually manages the state-owned enterprise giants, like the grid companies.
So we're talking about a utility executive having 3 powerful masters in Beijing: the planner, the regulator, and the asset manager. I mean, that sounds like a recipe for bureaucratic gridlock, not swift, coordinated action.
It absolutely leads to internal negotiation and complex bargaining, but the central government retains the ultimate leverage point, what we can call adaptable authority.
Adaptable authority.
The center possesses the capacity to delegate power to provinces and, crucially, to rescind it at any time. This adaptability is the secret sauce that allows the system to remain flexible and resilient during these massive transitions.
So policy execution isn't static. It's more of a cyclical strategy.
Yeah.
You loosen the reins to spur growth, and then you yank them back when the results start to deviate from the national plan.
That's the pattern, exactly. We saw the policy strategy of simplify governance and decentralize authority Jianzheng Fengquan used heavily to achieve rapid economic goals, particularly in the 80s and 90s power sector reforms.
So decentralization is a tool.
It's a tool to mobilize vast provincial resources and local ingenuity. However, as soon as that delegation leads to systemic problems like coal overcapacity or unsustainable pollution, the center reclaims administrative authority to guide the industrial structure. The capacity to re-centralize is never surrendered.
The structural and procedural elements are clear. Dual reporting and this cyclical authority. But you mentioned a kind of political doctrine, a cultural or institutional norm that supports the system's unity. What's a cohesive glue that forces local leaders to prioritize the national good over their own provincial revenues?
That glue is the political doctrine of coordinated national development, which is known as Kwanggo-Yipanki.
Which means?
It literally translates to the whole country as one chessboard. It encourages local officials to think with the big picture in mind dajuguan. And it's not just an aspiration, it's a profound institutional norm that underlies political legitimacy.
So the political doctrine dictates that the national economic chessboard is integrated, and every piece, every province, must play its mandated role, even if that role isn't immediately profitable for the local economy.
Precisely. This is key to explaining compliance, even when local economic benefits are lower. Take the massive ultra-high voltage, or UHV, grid projects. They transmit power from remote, resource-rich, but less economically developed regions like Xinjiang, all the way to the massive demand centers in the east.
Right.
Now, building these grids and accepting this exported power may offer the receiving provinces, like Guangdong, lower financial incentives than just building their own local captive power plants.
Of course. They'd rather control their own supply.
But the unifying norm of Kwanggo-Yipanki, that the nation is one integrated unit and resource allocation, is a strategic priority. It dictates that they participate. This doctrine is a powerful non-market force for achieving regional equity and political unity through massive infrastructure. It rationalizes large-scale resource allocation that might fail to pass a pure local CFO's profitability test.
The electric power sector is perhaps the most impressive demonstration of this centralized managed machine concept. The transformation from a single, state-run monopoly to the complex dual system we have today. It really showcases the state's adaptive capacity better than anything else.
It really does. The history of the sector from, say, the 1980s to the 2015 reforms is like a three-act play. It's driven by necessity, then efficiency, and finally by environmental mandates.
So let's start with phase one, negotiated decentralization. This spans roughly 1985 to the late 1990s and was driven by a desperate need for capacity, right?
Correct. In the pre-reform era, the sector was a single monolithic utility managed by the Ministry of Electric Power, the MEP. By the 1980s, chronic power shortages were crippling industrial output. The central government simply lacked the capital for the massive infrastructure expansion that was required.
So their solution was this GZ-Bandian strategy, cooling capital and treating provinces as functional entities, Chengwei Shidi.
That was it. They decentralized investment authority to unlock local capital.
What did that look like in practice?
The central government opened investment and power generation to third parties, provincial and sub-provincial governments, various state-owned entities, and even private and foreign companies. Provincial governments were given the authority to approve smaller projects.
And was it successful?
Hugely successful in mobilizing resources. The results were staggering. Installed capacity more than doubled, soaring from 96 gigawatts in 1986 to 226 gigawatts by the year 2000. It solved the shortage problem, but it created immense fragmentation and inefficiency.
And that fragmented landscape set the stage for the second act, the corporatization and restructuring push that started in the late 1990s. The central government needed to regain control over efficiency and standardization.
Exactly. Phase 2 focused on separating the state's regulatory functions from its business activities. So in 1997, the State Power Corporation of China, or SPCC, was formed. It took over the majority of the MEP's assets and performed only business functions. Regulatory oversight was moved to the state planning bodies.
But this was just the precursor to the massive structural change delivered by document number 5 in 2002.
That document was the big structural break. It was a landmark. It mandated the separation of generation assets from transmission and distribution, or T&D assets. The SPCC was broken up into 5 major state generation corporations, which were intended to compete with one another.
The Big Five.
The Big Five, yes. And 2 incredibly powerful grid corporations. The State Grid Corporation of China, SGCC, and the China Southern Power Grid, CSG.
So the core lesson here is that they sacrificed competition in transmission, the crucial backbone infrastructure, to ensure absolute central control over the grid while introducing competition only where they believed it was manageable in power generation.
That is the essential trade-off. Control over T&D guarantees the center's ability to execute national policies, like the mandated cross-regional transfers we just talked about. But even after these reforms, the center didn't rely solely on corporate structures. They maintained control over the expansion itself.
And how do they manage that capacity expansion? It sounds like project approval, rather than those non-binding 5-year plans, is the ultimate control mechanism.
That is precisely the case. While the long-term plans set the targets, the center retains ultimate control by greenlighting the actual investments. And here again, we see that cyclical use of adaptable authority. After 2004, they decentralized project approval again, this time for smaller projects like wind farms below 50 megawatts.
And that successfully spurred investment, but it also led to local governments kind of abusing the system, right? The proliferation of all those 49-megawatt wind projects designed specifically to bypass central approval.
It did. It worked too well, in a way. That decentralized boom, however, eventually led to the opposite problem overcapacity, especially in coal.
Right. So how did the center pull the reins back on that massive momentum?
When investment got out of hand, the center didn't hesitate to re-centralize. They recognized the severe coal overcapacity problem. I mean, thermal plant utilization rates hit an all-time low of 49.4% in 2015.
Wow. Half the fleet was idle.
Essentially. So the central government strategically reclaimed administrative authority. In 2016, they implemented the traffic light system for the provinces.
Tell us about the traffic light system. That sounds like a fascinating display of centralized power.
It was a digital monitoring and restriction system. Provinces were evaluated on key metrics like their capacity utilization and new construction plans. If a province was labeled red, it was flatly forbidden from approving any new coal power projects.
Just stopped.
A clear, non-negotiable decree. This perfectly demonstrates the state's capacity to adjust industrial structure rapidly, reclaiming administrative authority to prevent wasteful investment and meet national environmental targets, even overriding local economic aspirations.
To truly grasp how this managed machine handles diversity, we need to compare 2 distinct provincial cases. I'm thinking Guangdong and Xinjiang. They seem to represent 2 completely different strategic functions within the national economy.
They are textbook examples of differentiated policy application within a unified framework. Take Guangdong. It is the major market hub. It's economically advanced, highly market-oriented, but critically, it is energy resource poor. It closed its last coal mine nearly 2 decades ago.
So high demand, low indigenous resources. Its primary strategic need is guaranteed supply and market efficiency.
Exactly. This forces reliance on imports, which accounted for a significant 28% of its total electricity consumption in 2016. Generation there is dominated by provincial state-owned enterprises, which hold about a 45% market share. For Guangdong, central policy reform focuses on ensuring stable supply through complex cross-regional trading and maximizing the scale of market trading to optimize prices for its massive manufacturing base.
So Guangdong needs reliable, cheap power more than it needs to build its own power plant.
That's the bottom line. Now contrast that with Xinjiang, the vast, resource-rich exporter.
The energy base.
It is the energy base. It holds about 40% of the country's coal reserves and has vast renewable potential. Its economy is overwhelmingly focused on heavy industry, with industrial consumption accounting for a staggering 85.4% of its electricity use in 2016. Its strategic mandate is not local consumption, it's massive export.
It's the powerhouse built to fuel the coastal regions.
That defines its entire trajectory. Xinjiang is a huge power exporter, sending 36% of its production to other provinces in 2016. The policy here focuses on massive capacity expansion. Its installed capacity surged from 1.9 gigawatts in 1990 to 81 gigawatts in 2016.
An incredible increase.
And utilizing the ultra-high voltage grids to transmit that power across vast distances. These two provinces, operating under entirely different economic pressures and resource constraints, show a central system adapting its policy levers to maximize the comparative advantage of each, all while ensuring national strategic goals are met.
The coordination between these central mandates and all this regional diversity becomes especially clear when we look at the modernization of infrastructure and the calculated move toward market integration. Let's start with strategic pricing reform. Historically, prices were just fixed and subsidized, which led to chronic shortages and poor efficiency.
The transition away from that system is fascinating. Post-1980s, the system evolved into a dual-track pricing model where administratively determined prices, which often reflected strategic goals, coexisted with, and later gave way to market prices.
And how did they use those price signals strategically to manage the regional differences we just talked about?
The benchmark tariff policy, which was introduced in 2004, unified prices within provinces but allowed for significant differentiation across provinces.
Okay.
And this differentiation wasn't arbitrary. It was designed to reflect regional fuel costs and varying development goals. Look at our two examples again. In 2017, Guangdong had average on-grid tariffs of about RMB 0.44 per kilowatt hour. Xinjiang's tariff was RMB 0.22.
Half the price, a double price spread. So Guangdong's high price reflects the cost of importing expensive coal and electricity, while Xinjiang's low price reflects its resource abundance and its strategic role as a bulk exporter. The state is using the tariff structure to manage investment and cost recovery regionally.
Precisely. It uses price signals strategically, but they remain politically guided, ensuring that investment flows to where the state needs capacity most. And looking toward full marketization, a significant step was taken in January 2020 when they abolished the benchmark on-grid tariffs for coal-fired power plants. That signaled a real shift toward market-determined pricing for conventional energy.
Now let's discuss the engine of the green transition, incentivizing clean energy growth. This required massive state intervention to de-risk investments in new technologies like wind and solar, which were initially very expensive.
The primary tool here was the deployment of feed-in tariffs, or FITs, as a national policy mechanism to rapidly expand renewable energy capacity. The system was structured to overcome the initial high costs and investment risks associated with building large-scale wind and solar farms.
So they standardized the tariffs for wind power, given that some regions are much windier than others.
For wind power, the NDRC implemented standardized but regionally differentiated four-category FITs back in 2009. These categories were based on resource abundance.
Okay, so a tiered system.
A tiered system. For the most wind-abundant regions, Category I, generally in the north and northwest, the tariff was set lower, at RMB 0.51 per kilowatt hour. For areas with less optimal resources, the tariff was higher, up to RMB 0.61.
So the core mechanism wasn't just subsidy. It was predictable, differentiated subsidy that guaranteed developers returns tailored to their resource risk. It encouraged massive coordinated investment.
That is the crucial insight. And they applied a dynamic version of this to solar PV power as well, which has been central to their global leadership in solar deployment. They started with a national benchmark tariff system in 2011. The initial tariffs were very generous, RMB 1.15 per kilowatt hour for certain projects, which triggered an explosive construction boom, particularly in the western regions.
But unlike many subsidy programs, which can become these perpetual crutches, the central government systematically ratcheted the tariffs downward as costs fell and manufacturing capacity matured.
Yes, they consistently adjusted these tariffs downward over time, which forced efficiency and cost reduction onto the developers. By 2019, the tariffs for utility-scale projects had dropped substantially, down to around RMB 0.4 per kilowatt hour in the best resource regions. This consistent downward pressure, coupled with strategic support for distributed solar PV projects, ensured robust, sustained growth while simultaneously forcing the domestic supply chain to become globally competitive.
This high level of coordination and management also required creating competitive trading structures. Where was marketization most successful following those 2015 reforms?
The expansion of competitive wholesale markets really began with intra-provincial trading. Primarily, they revived bilateral trading through power purchase agreements, or PPAs. The immediate practical aim was to reduce end-user prices for large industrial customers who needed cost stability. And this mechanism has been hugely successful in the key market hubs.
And Guangdong stands out again as the major success story for intra-provincial market transactions.
Absolutely. As a resource-poor but highly sophisticated market, Guangdong saw its total trading volume expand dramatically. It soared from about 116 billion kilowatt hours in 2017 to 250 billion by 2020.
Wow.
This volume is transacted through bilateral agreements and represents an enormous liberalization within the provincial market framework, reducing costs for consumers and increasing efficiency for generators.
But the truly impressive feat of coordination involves the cross-regional transmission, connecting these diverse, sometimes competing provincial markets. This is where that concept of Quango Yupan Ki, the whole country as one chessboard, physically manifests.
That's the entire function of the West-East Electricity Transfer Project, or WEAT. This is not a market outcome. It is a central government initiative using massive infrastructure, specifically those ultra-high voltage grids, to address chronic supply and demand imbalances.
And the UHV technology is key.
It's the physical backbone. It's capable of transmitting power over thousands of kilometers with minimal loss. It's what makes the political unity and coordinated resource allocation across the nation physically possible.
And building this required intense negotiation between the resource-rich suppliers and the demand-heavy buyers. What does that interprovincial negotiation look like?
Consider the relationship between Yunnan and Guangdong. Yunnan is hydro-rich and has very low generation costs. Guangdong has high demand and high generation costs. They engage in an annual negotiation process.
Okay.
The WEAT project mandate means power transmission from Yunnan to Guangdong rose significantly, reaching 138 billion kilowatt hours in 2018. While much of this is administratively planned to ensure national strategic supply, an increasing portion is now conducted through market-oriented transactions. Yunnan's hydropower has a clear price advantage over Guangdong's thermal power, which creates powerful economic incentives for cooperation, all reinforced by the central mandate of coordinated national development.
Finally, let's talk about the modernization of the distribution network. The focus has often been on these massive transmission lines, but local reliability and attracting new capital at the local level is crucial, especially for integrating distributed renewables.
That's right. The reform targeting distribution networks, that's grids below 110 kilovolts, was specifically designed to attract investment and foster competition through pilot projects. This reform is known as Zhengliang Peidian. It was an acknowledgement that modernization required investment at all levels, not just the massive UHV lines.
What was the scale of this effort?
It was immense. The National Energy Administration planned investments of over 2 trillion RMB in distribution grids just from 2015 to 2020 alone.
Per trillion.
Yes. That represented 65% of the total grid investment during that period. It signals a real strategic shift in focus from pure transmission dominance to localized, modernized distribution.
And the pilot projects were strategically placed to ensure maximum impact on high-growth areas.
Yes. They were located in high-demand industrial zones, like the Shenzhen-Qianhai-Shekou Free Trade Zone, which was the first non-grid enterprise in the country to obtain a power supply business license. This targeted approach focused supply optimization on key contributors to local economic growth. It's a clear strategic linkage between energy policy and industrial development goals.
It sounds like an airtight system, but there must have been resistance, particularly from the incumbent grid monopolies, State Grid, and China Southern Power Grid. Did the state capacity struggle when it faced powerful internal resistance?
Oh, resistance certainly occurred. The two centrally owned power monopolies were often passive or actively resistant to the new distribution policies. Pilot project implementers reported that the grid companies were reluctant to negotiate power supply area demarcation lines, or sometimes they'd even withhold key technical data, deliberately procrastinating the reforms and protecting their historical turf.
So internal sabotage, basically. How did the central mechanism respond to that?
This is where that adaptive capacity proves its resilience. When the center saw the slow progress, the NDRC and the NEA publicly disclosed the failure in late 2018. They criticized local governments and the grid companies for deviating from the reform objectives.
They called them out publicly.
And subsequently, the central authorities issued further instructions in 2019, strictly forbidding local governments and existing grid companies from holding dominant shares in the pilot projects and stipulating that all projects should be subject to open bidding to stimulate effective competition.
So the system adjusts. It learns from resistance and pushes back against internal inertia to maintain the reform trajectory.
Demonstrating continuous political guidance. What we have detailed today is a comprehensive system built on layered, reinforcing capabilities. We started with the institutional framework of the river chief system, which successfully linked ecological mandates directly to the career progression of local officials, achieving measurable, sustained environmental success like the Yangtze's Class II water quality.
We then examined the bureaucratic engine, the Tiao Kui system, which enables central direction even amid functional fragmentation. It relies on adaptable authority that can be decentralized to spur growth or re-centralized using tools like the coal traffic light system when strategic control is required.
And critically, these formal mechanisms are unified by cultural and institutional norms like Kwango Yapan Ki, the idea of the whole country as one chessboard, which rationalizes massive infrastructure projects like the UHV grids and the West-East Electricity Transfer Project, ensuring regional resources, be it Xinjiang's coal or Hudan's hydro, serve a national strategic interest, even overriding local financial concerns.
And finally, we saw the strategic policy tools in action, the use of differentiated feed-in tariffs to rapidly scale renewables, and the development of dual-track pricing and competitive bilateral trading markets like the one in Guangdong. The critical takeaway is that the return of the Yangtze finless porpoise, the dramatic industrial shift, and the rapid deployment of a modernized power grid all illustrate the same underlying capacity. The ability to plan, fund, and execute systemic, massive-scale transitions by treating these complex industrial and ecological challenges not as political debates, but as calibrated engineering deliverables. This demonstrated capacity for systematic environmental and industrial management illustrates a unique pathway for large-scale energy and ecological transition.